Hey StFX, we're just back with another candidate interview series today, and we've got Dr. Chris Frazer from the Communist Party of Canada, running as a nominated candidate in Central Nova. So honestly, just before we start, we would like to acknowledge again that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And nextly, it's really great having you here today, Dr. Frazer. I'll pass it over to you. First couple questions are really just about, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, and then also kind of what got you into politics in the first place?
So, thank you, Ben. So, I'm a faculty member here at StFX, and I teach in the history department. My training is a Latin Americanist, so I teach here the history of the Cuban Revolution, the Mexican Revolution. I teach history of modern and colonial Latin America, as well as a course on pirates of the Caribbean. So, and I also teach in the Social Justice Colloquium, which is a first-year program for students, and they take 3 courses in common, including my 2 history courses, one of which is Empire and Epidemic, which is actually a history of pandemics, and then Liberation and Revolution in the second term. So those are the kinds of courses I teach, and yeah. So that's kind of who I am here. I'm also a drag performer, and I produce a drag show here at StFX called Priscilla, Queen of the Highlands, and I perform regularly in Halifax. I was down for Pride in Halifax earlier this summer performing. I'm an athlete, I play hockey, I'm a goalie, so anyways, all those kinds of things are who I am. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So what got you on to go into politics?
Politics, yeah. I was always interested in politics. I just didn't know very much about it, and I had always been skeptical about politicians and the political system. I would say that by the time I was in my late teens, I was probably something closer to an anarchist, and I was very concerned about the environment even in those days. So that would have been about 1977, 78. So I actually helped to found the first Greenpeace chapter in Calgary when I was 18. A year later, I was at Mount Royal College, and I decided to run for the Students Union because I was very concerned about the cost of tuition, about student debt, and issues of student housing. So I ran and I won by a landslide, and then I found myself on the Board of Governors at Mount Royal. This is at Mount Royal University in Calgary. So while I was on the Board of Governors, I discovered that the provincial government was intending to reduce funding to the university by several $100,000, maybe even $1 million or $2. And that was going to lead to the elimination of approximately 44 sections of various courses, but without a decrease in the student population. So that meant that lots of students on that campus were going to be unable to complete their diploma programs because they were going to be booted from the sections of the courses that were required for the diploma. So that means an extra year, right? An extra year of tuition fees, an extra year of debt, all of that. So I talked to my student council, and I said, you know, we have to do something about this. The Board of Governors had a defeatist attitude. They felt there was nothing that could be done.
Okay.
Never mind the fact that they had all been appointed by the Conservative government in Alberta, and they were all Conservative Party members and just towing the line. So I was very upset, and I said, we have to do something about it. It's our job to defend the interests of our students, our members. So we had a vote, and we decided to call a one-day strike. We set the date for October 12th, and then we campaigned like hell. We explained to students what was happening, that they're all about to get screwed, and we pulled that off. We shut the campus down for a day, an entire day. There wasn't one class that was attended, and we held an enormous rally in the center of campus. Nearly 2,000 students showed up for that. So we had people come and speak to the issue, and then the next day, the Minister of Advanced Education and Manpower called my office and said, why the hell didn't you come and talk to us first? And I said, why the hell didn't you come to talk to us first when you decided to cut the money from our university?
Right.
So no, you already put your foot in the shit. So, so we're pushing back. And make no mistake about it, we're not stopping until we get the money back and we want our courses restored. And it happened a week later. I got messages from the Board of Governors who were just gobsmacked that we were able to pull it off, and they said, congratulations on holding, you know, a really successful event, and I'm kind of going, you weren't saying that last week.
Yeah.
The Faculty Association was really happy and supportive of us because we actually saved some jobs by doing that action. And that was just a lesson for me about the reality, which is that you can do something. You aren't always going to win, but you can. And it also met my mandate as when I was running for election. My mandate was to freeze and then abolish tuition fees, to eliminate student debt, and then to abolish the loan program and replace it with set grants for all students, so you get a bursary to cover your education costs rather than a loan. So those were two of the key planks, and then the other one, I was calling for free bus fares for all students. So those kinds of things, and I felt like I had met my mandate just already by October 12th, right? Because we were fighting and we won. And that's also what led me directly into the Communist Party, because the people who were the most consistent and dedicated was the very small number of communists who were on that campus, and they supported the campaign without ever expecting anything back. They did more work than anybody else. And so they were dedicated and committed, and it wasn't anything I had expected, so I just started to look into it, and while I had my doubts about some things, I thought these are the kind of people that I think I would like to associate with, because they have a sense of social justice, and they will become active based on that moral attitude, which is that, you know, some things are just wrong and they need to be resisted. So that moment is what really brought me into the Communist Party and into being a political activist. I would say also that I'm never regard myself as a political person, strange as that may sound, and I'm most certainly not a politician, but I am an activist. I am an activist around social justice issues, and for me, running in the federal elections is really a way of holding the incumbents to account and to exposing some of the harmful policies of some of the other candidates, in particularly the Conservatives and the PPC. We've got candidates running in this election who are about as close to the fascist edge as you can get without being openly fascist, and that would be Al Muir, by the way. So, anyways, that's my long-winded answer.
No, Dr. Frazer, love that response, and I also love, like, that definitely hits close to home for me. I went to school first decade and a bit of my life across the street from Mount Royal College at Sainte-Marie-Bourgeois.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, so yeah, that definitely hits close to home. What a great story about really just, you know, like even when it's seeming kind of powerless, when you've got people that are willing to put the work in and you're doing the right thing, it's really easy to get that result, which is, it's fantastic to hear. I'll ask you next, there's a number of key issues facing Nova Scotians, Canadians, and youth in particular across the board. What would you say your top challenges, your top issues that you would want to confront this federal election?
So the most important thing hands down is to get serious about climate change. So I'll just say a couple words about that. And the main thing is that you know that Canada has completely failed to meet its target that it set at the Paris Climate Conference several years back. And so, like, our emissions in Canada, the carbon are actually rising still. We have not reduced them. So the gap between our commitment to reach whatever level of emissions, we have completely failed. So we are even deeper in the crisis now than we were before. So climate change has to happen, and the only thing I see that the federal government has done is to impose a carbon tax, but that's just taxing people for their use of carbon. And what people will do is until they can't pay anymore, they will continue to pay that tax until they become too impoverished to do so. But it does not, so it reduces people's income and it hits people disproportionately if they're on low income. So it's a hardship tax to try and solve the climate crisis. And then it has completely failed to even do that. So there needs to be a really systematic, well thought out approach, and that involves a transition in the economy, not just a reduction. So climate change, shift to renewables entirely, shut down oil and gas and coal. It has to happen. Also, did you know that 59% of Canada's carbon emissions comes from its military?
Did not know that.
So there's a good argument for reducing the size and operations of Canada's military to a purely defensive force.
For sure.
Right? We should not be overseas in other countries. I think it's reasonable to defend Canadian borders, but sending troops outside, absolutely not. And we need to reduce the emissions in Canada. We have to include the Air Force and the Canadian Armed Forces in that process. So climate change is a big one. And it also is about jobs for young people too. The transition from a traditional manufacturing base into an economy based on renewals means that more jobs are going to have to be opened up, and you will need people trained to do that. And I'm quite convinced that there's not a university in this country that is actually systematically training people to be developers of renewables in the economy. There's a lot of work to be done. But even here at StFX, there's more research being done in earth sciences and around oil and gas than there is about renewables. So universities have an obligation to get serious about this. So that's number one. Number two is the economic recovery. And what we're seeing right now is an economic recovery that is benefiting corporations, especially the biggest ones. And so they're continuing to reap pretty healthy profits. So who's suffering? Who's suffering are the small businesses. Okay, the small bit, and we see that here. I saw it in Halifax just the other day. One of my favorite restaurants has just closed, Ardmore, which is on Quinpool. They've been around that community for decades, and now they're gone because of it. So there's been no safety net there, and most certainly no safety net for people with lower incomes. We have a serious problem with mass unemployment right now in this country, and underemployment. And this affects students too. It is harder to find a job that pays you an income that will allow you to keep your head above water. And all you got to do is look around and see the kinds of expenses that are being imposed on people. Even in this town, the prices on real estate, the levels of rent that students have to pay, and just working people. If you do a survey around Antigonish, for example, I can tell you exactly where the highest concentrations of working class people are, and they aren't in the town of Antigonish. They're in the trailer courts around Antigonish. Why? Because real estate prices, compared to the kinds of incomes people can earn, prevents them from actually living in this town. The people who live in this town are middle-class people who can afford it, and students who have to have access to the university. So y'all get gouged with these per-room prices, right? And it's that cumulative. So what, maybe 4 or 5 students to a house? At about $400 or $500, maybe $600. So what's the total value on the rent for a place like that? It brings it up to about $2,500 sometimes, maybe more. But that's the driver for rents for everything else. Okay, that sets the pace. And so people who are making $15 an hour or $13 an hour, whatever it is, can't afford that. Okay, so they get pushed to the outskirts and the margins of town. So you're marginalizing people who are already marginalized, and that's what's happening. We say we need a people's recovery, and there are some very practical things that have to happen. Jobs have to be guaranteed, and as I've indicated already, there are jobs to be had in building a real renewables economy. Yeah. The second thing is to impose double the corporate tax rate. We live in a time of austerity. We've lived with austerity since 1980, so it seems really normal for us now. And by austerity, what I mean is government funding being systematically reduced to various parts of the social sector, and that includes education. So if you look at tuition fees, for example, what are they at StFX now? $9,000, $10,000? Yeah.
it also depends.
Unless you're an international student, it's double.
Student out of province also is unregulated here.
Yep.
So that's what you're seeing.
Yeah. So why are those levels of tuition fees being paid? I paid $300 a semester.
Wow.
Okay, that's only 40 years ago. That's not that long ago.
Yeah.
Okay, really.
Wow.
$300 a semester. It was a little bit.
Sounds like a fever dream.
It was about $1,200 maybe a year at the University of Calgary when I got there. So the reason you're paying that much is that government support for universities has consistently been dropping and is below the rate of inflation. So that money has to be made up, and it's being made up in two areas. Okay, they're picking your pockets, and also they're soliciting corporate donations for things like buildings and so on. And then you're running on a thin budget for the rest of the year, and that money then gets taken out in various ways out of the pocketbooks of custodians, tradespeople, admin assistants who all work at universities who now have to pay a $250 parking fee. You know, so that is what austerity means. What we say instead is that you could have all of that without anybody having to pay a thing.
Yeah.
How do you do it? Right now, corporate taxes are about 15%. I guarantee you personal income taxes are way higher than that. So we're making up the difference for what rich people are not paying. And so our proposal is to increase to double corporate tax rates, and then we'll have a revenue stream that can be used to properly finance post-secondary education. It would give us the capacity to abolish tuition fees and to provide all students with grants, which automatically is going to increase the quality of your life, and to create jobs. When you expand institutions that are funded with social money, I mean federal funds like universities, schools, daycares, when you pump money into that, you expand the operation, and then you have to start hiring people to perform those jobs, right? So this is a job creation thing. Raise the minimum wage. In Antigonish, you absolutely have to have at least $21 an hour. That's the living wage here in Antigonish. So those kinds of things. So there has to be a recovery in the economy that protects the right to have a job, to have a decent, livable income, to have a house that you can afford to live in that is decent without bed bugs and dicey infrastructure. My house is kind of falling apart, which some of us know. So that's the second thing. That's the second priority. I mean, and it's pretty broad reaching to say a people's recovery of the economy because it touches on a lot of aspects of our lives, but so climate change and a people's recovery.
Fantastic. It also, like, you almost like answered, like you basically knocked on everything that I wanted to talk to you about there, which is fantastic. Exactly. We can build on that. So I'll get down into it, and also love those 2 points. It's fantastic. And and understandable, a people's recovery, it's gonna be broad reaching. It's gonna touch a bunch of different sectors because we see there's so much different stuff going on in so many different aspects of life.
And it's all connected anyways.
Exactly, at the end of the day. So the first thing that I'll really touch on is just the affordability of education in the first place. So just continues to be a barrier for many youth that are coming in. And then, the highest average tuition cost is actually here in Nova Scotia. So just a continuous barrier. Just really wondering, like, how would your party and yourself seek to address that those financial barriers don't continue to be what is stopping these students from coming in?
Well, we'll just start from, just very specific policy options. One, abolish tuition fees, flat out. If I was elected, if we actually formed a government, we would abolish tuition fees the next day.
Wow.
Okay? This is an unjust practice to begin with, and there's no justification for continuing it. And I will point to many countries around this world, including Western European countries, that have no tuition fees for post-secondary. So it is actually an anomaly on a global scale that Canada and the United States continue to charge tuition fees. And it's not actually normal, but it is for us. We just get used to it. It doesn't have to be that way. And the reason we advocate that is just that, look, education, even post-secondary education, not just a personal good. It gives people opportunities in their lives. But these are people who have opportunities who then can do good for the community, right? An educated mind is an asset to every community. And that's what we want to see. We want to see people who are able to realize to the fullest extent their physical and mental capacities and to contribute that to the good of the community. So everybody should have that opportunity. There should not be a financial barrier. So eliminate tuition fees, eliminate student debt, simply cancel it. Yeah. Simply cancel it and then replace that with a universal system of student bursaries. So you can pay your rent, so you can buy your books, you can pay for decent meals that aren't, crappy, unhealthy Sodexo food, which just builds up the fucking cholesterol, which just builds up cholesterol in your bloodstream and is going to give you a stroke when you're ready to retire. Anyway, that's just a shot at Sodexo. But you get what I mean, is that it gives you more freedom and alternatives if you aren't burdened by debt and the necessity of having to pay outrageous tuition fees. The second thing is decent housing for all students, whether you're on campus or off campus, right? Yeah. I've seen some of the residence rooms. I'd be hard-pressed to be able to survive a year. Yeah. I'd be first in line to get off campus the next year, honest to God. But then you get off campus and it's a coin toss where you end up, right? Yeah. But I think what we need to do is to make sure that those spaces are affordable and that they are decently maintained. No more of this absentee landlord stuff where, things run down and don't get fixed and so on. There's no real reason for young people to have that experience. You can get life experience in much better ways. You don't have to put up with cockroaches and stuff like that. So that would be a start. I would also say that we need to get at things like cost of books and ancillary shit. Oh yeah, quit charging ancillary fees also. Yeah. One of the ways to do that is to like health plans are, I think, always of concern to students. Nobody wants to get sick, and if something serious happens, you need to be treated. So a universal health system that is truly universal in every aspect, dental care, pharmacare, as well as regular health care. Also incentives to make sure that we have sufficient doctors in this area, because they're hard to come by too. Oh, for sure. So this, is there a health plan here?
There is, run through the Students Union.
Yeah. It would be better if students didn't even have to worry about that. Right. They could arrive here, right? I mean, if you're a Canadian, we have a universal Canadian healthcare system. We have a Canadian Health Act, which never gets enforced. Because a lot of the stuff that goes on in Nova Scotia and other provinces with private money and restrictions on what is offered is actually in a violation of the Canadian Health Act. Nobody does a thing about it. So that we would do that. We would actually enforce Canadian Health Act, and that means that people would actually have health insurance that would be portable across the country, and you wouldn't be stuck in Nova Scotia or Manitoba plan or wherever it is you're coming from. It just has to be universal, and you ought to be able to expect the same level of care regardless of what part of the country you're from and or going to. And it has to apply to students as well. Yeah, you just have to have, it's enough of stress to get through an academic year and then not to really have reliable access to mental health care except maybe through a phone-in line. It doesn't quite cut it. So those measures too is how those are the sorts of things we would be thinking about for students, and
Fantastic. No, I think there was definitely a couple of things touched on there that even kind of filtered into my next question. But I love what you were saying about tuition wise. 100%. There's a lot of strides that could be made. Healthcare wise, that's one of the largest concerns that I hear here is mental health wise and those supports. But then also, on the housing side of things, we've seen it absolutely blow up in the last month and a half in Halifax, Nova Scotia as a whole. And we know that's a crazy experience. You touched on this a little bit, but just in terms of the debt levels after university, you were talking about grants instead of student loans, kind of moving towards needs-based grants rather than merit-based. like all like large ideas, because we know that many new graduates end up delaying milestones like buying a house, starting a family, because of that money that they end up having to owe back. So as you already touched on this, I'll allow you to get going on a little bit more, but yeah, like what would your guys' ideas be in terms of, yeah, supporting this group that's really been hit hard in the last year and a half?
Yeah. So the one of the problems with student indebtedness, and you touched on it, it's about you graduate with an accumulated debt. So I don't know, what would be the average debt load upon after 4 years of graduation? 30,000,
Yeah.
right? And if you're going for a professional degree like lawyer or doctor, it's going to double or even triple that, right? So you start off your life with a huge debt, right? I just finished paying off all of my debts. I never had a student debt.
Nice.
One, because I refused to pay it back,
Nice.
and they couldn't make me pay.
Yeah. There you go.
It wasn't.
Right under the radar.
I just thought it was wrong. You know the Bible condemns usury, right? Usury is a sin. Usury is charging of interest on loans. That's a mortal sin.
Okay.
So I don't understand why all of these bankers who claim to be Christians, I think they're not getting into heaven. I think they get sent straight to hell, which is where they belong. But this is. This is it. So, and what happens to you when you graduate and you've got that level of debt, say $30,000 or $35,000, and then you're struck with the reality of the window that you've got before payments come into effect? Because what is it? You've got 6 months or something, right? And what happens if you haven't been able to find a decent paying job after 6 months? You're really in some trouble right out of graduation. You know, so everything that you might want to dream about, acquiring the down payment that you might need to maybe purchase a house or to get a car or to get yourself set up, this really puts shackles on you because now you really have to look for a job not necessarily that you want to do, but that is going to allow you to pay down your debt. So it's a pretty tough way to start. It also, as Noam Chomsky has pointed out, has a tendency to produce compliant graduates, people who are not necessarily going to rock the boat because they need that job in order to pay down their debt so they don't go into default and bankruptcy.
So you stick with the status quo.
You stick with the straight and narrow because you've got to get yourself through to the end of it, right? That system actually narrows your opportunities after you graduate. It works against what the entire post-secondary system is supposed to achieve, which is to give you skill sets that will help you achieve success in your life. But if you come out of the starting gate with that much debt, you're already making choices that are narrowed and it will become increasingly narrow. So I'm going to make the point that absolutely undermines very purpose of post-secondary education, to have that level of debt and to have to pay that much tuition fee. It undermines education and it undermines its purpose. So the two actually can't go hand in hand. So they shouldn't. And our proposal, just eliminate student debt. That'd be the second thing we do after abolishing tuition fees. and we'd provide them with whatever is a necessary level of income to get through an academic year. That's just what you have to do. Do you want good, smart minds building this country?
Yeah.
Then you have to create the conditions that will allow that to happen. And you have to invest. That's an investment in our young people, and I can't think of a better thing to invest in. And if you're not investing in young people, I think you're doing a disservice to them and to the country.
Fantastic.
Honestly.
No, I completely agree with you. I think it's a large fear of a lot of students that leave here, obviously, because that grace period really isn't long enough to be able to get yourself situated, and all of a sudden you've got a payment plan that's popping up and no funds.
Get home for the summer and chill and have a couple of beers, and then all of a sudden you're smacked in the face with hard, cold reality.
Exactly. So yeah, thanks for that answer, Dr. Frazer. I'll just toss it down to the next one, which is kind of concerning equity on campus and also in the country. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately impacted some groups over others and further exacerbated inequalities that were pre-existing in our society. And this is a large thought on the minds of students on our campus. So what kinds of policies, if any, will you and your party pursue to promote social and racial justice?
So racial and social justice are pretty high priorities for us, and you probably know very well that that's kind of a hallmark of my career here at StFX is around equity issues. I mean, I've served as an advisor for LGBTQ students. I'm known for an activist in the queer community. Also, with respect to anti-racist work, and I've done organizing in solidarity with Indigenous people, including the Mi'kmaq fishery here in Nova Scotia. So all of these things are of personal concern to me, and they also make me kind of proud to be in the party I belong to, because our position is uncompromising on all of those points. We call for absolute equality for people, whether it's a marginalized community in terms of their sexual identity or the gender identity, or whether they're racialized people or colonized people. So these are enduring problems that have been around for as long as I've been on this earth, and even longer than that. So we can't really expect ourselves to move forward either on a university campus or as a country unless we actually take measures that resolve these on a long-term basis, not just kind of on a 4-year election window, which is really what it's based on. So, so there's work to be done, and I think if we start, well, we'll start first with probably the original sin of this country, which is the displacement and the oppression of Indigenous communities, and we have to get serious about the fact that we are, as settlers, we're also treaty people, and we have obligations under the treaties that we signed. And here in Nova Scotia, the treaties of 1752 onwards unambiguously give Mi'kmaq people the right to have their own fishery and to control it. And we're right now seeing a war between the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, who are seizing Mi'kmaq traps, boats, finding people, and Chief Sack, who was arrested the first day they launched their fishery this year. So there's an ongoing attempt to deprive Mi'kmaq people of their access to their treaty-guaranteed resources. Now, the thing about that, if you want to control people, the easiest way to do that is to separate them from the land and from the resources that they would normally use to maintain their autonomy. And that's been the strategy of the federal government for decades, to keep, one, Indigenous people under control, and two, gain access to resources that rightfully belong to Indigenous communities. That's why there is an ongoing boil water order on reservations right across this country. It's why we see the unwillingness to resolve the disputes over the fisheries here in Nova Scotia. So, and when we talk about being on unceded Mi'kmaq land, and we start to think about the implications of that, I don't know that we really take it all that seriously, especially at governmental levels. Stephen McNeill was infamous for saying that these are a conquered people. We don't have to consult with them, right? That's still tied up in a court over that issue. So the reality, so there's two ways for federal governments and provincial governments to talk about Indigenous peoples. On the one hand, they want to say all the right words about acknowledging this, that, and the other thing, but their practical policies do not do anything to defend what is ultimately has got to happen, which is Indigenous sovereignty over their own lands and over their own resources. Yeah. They get to make the decision, not us. And I don't get what the fear of that is. Is it a fear that Mi'kmaq people might do to us what we've done to them? Is that really what it is? Because I guarantee that's not going to happen. We'd have a much better province and a much better country if we could just get away from our own anxiety and come to terms with Indigenous peoples as equal and voluntary partners on this land. That would be our goal. So that's the first equity thing. And then provide Indigenous students who come to this university with the resources that they actually need. It's better than it was when I got here first, 17 years ago, but it is still not in the place where it needs to be, okay? Same thing with racialized students, and we saw that a lot over the course of the pandemic and the uptick, the horrifying uptick in police brutality and killings, not just in the United States, but also all across Canada too, right? And I think we got a good measure of how deeply that issue of resisting racism resonates in Antigonish County. Last summer, I had the privilege of being asked to help organize the Black Lives Matter March here in Antigonish, which I did. And we put 4,000 people on the streets. That's fully 25% of the entire population of the county. And it was mostly young people, in their vast majority. So what that tells me is that people here know that there's a problem with racism, anti-Black racism, and they want to see an end to it. They may not have a clear perspective on how we get there, but they know they are not willing to tolerate it anymore, and that's why people turned out. So I think we have to get a lot more serious about how we deal with hate crimes against racialized people, because it's still happening, right? And I think we have to undergo a lot more training about how we overcome our own racist biases, because I think that's still quite true. And I know for a fact that I carry that with me too. I just try to be really aware of it, and when I fail in that respect, you have to recognize it and even call yourself out. So this is just the way we have to learn how to behave. I used the phrase actually about when I was speaking to the white people who came to the Black Lives Matter. I said, you know, if you want to truly contribute to resisting racialization, then you also have to be prepared to get called out every once in a while. And don't get upset when you get called out. In fact, you need to lean into it and embrace it, because that's the way you're going to learn how to be a better anti-racist activist, you see. So, and it is the same with our relationships with Indigenous peoples too. And it is actually big part just about listening to them, what they say, what their needs are. And this goes the same way for the federal government. And this is where we come down to policy. So the most important thing is that they actually, Indigenous peoples, Black people, racialized people, all kinds, need to have the final say in what kinds of programs they need in order to elevate themselves to finally an equal status in this country, and what kind of resources have to be committed to it. So this first step is not saying, well, this is what we're going to do for you. It's let's have a talk and tell us what are the problems that you have in your community, and what are the resources that you need to have access to, and your people in charge of managing it. So that's the starting point for me.
I think you honestly just said something there at the end that I don't even know if we've heard throughout this series so far, and that's letting those communities that are most impacted manage it themselves. What are you scared of, right? These are issues that we need to be committed to taking down, and there's nobody better to manage the actual process of healing than those who are impacted. This is it. So 100%, thank you for that answer, Dr. Frazer. The last question is really just about the climate emergency. Yeah. So it's at the forefront of conversation here on campus, around the world. Youth are especially concerned because we know that we will be disproportionately impacted exponentially as the years go on. So we're really just wondering, how would you and your party go about confronting this climate emergency head on?
Well, so there's a number of, hello, Henderson. I hope that doesn't have to get cut out. Anyways, oil and gas has to be shut down. No more buying pipelines. What is that about, right? And absolutely closing down the tar sands. They are the value and the quality of the petroleum being brought out of the tar sands is absolutely marginal, and is actually more expensive to extract and then process than it's worth. And there's actually oil and gas companies have told this to even the provincial government in Alberta, that they need a different approach. Well, that much is true. So the oil and gas industry, we have to absolutely begin now making that transition away from oil and gas. And then you have to think about how that's going to, what ripple effect that has going downstream into the economy. So in Nova Scotia, for example, well, there's still a lot of home heating oil being used, right? And that's going to go. It has to go. And so do, yeah, and we have to, and so that means we have to provide that alternative to people. And it can't be these financial incentives to, install a heat pump, or to put in, we'll give you some financial incentives to put in affordable solar panels. No, you just give people the goddamn solar panels and you provide them with the alternatives so that, we make that switch en masse. What we see is kind of futzing around the edges of what needs to be done, but nobody's yet really made the big move towards it. And I think that's partly because at least the mainstream parties, especially the Conservatives and the Liberals, are in bed with corporate Canada, and in particular oil and gas. So it's not going to come from Liberals and Conservatives. It won't. Right. Not without pressure from the streets. So that's the first thing. The second thing, practical measures. Well, what do you replace all of that with? Last election campaign, I suggested something which I think still has to happen. And so things like high-speed rail, passenger rail from Yarmouth to Sydney. Why not? We've got the tracks. Yeah. Why aren't we putting passenger rail service back in? Because that's going to take cars off the highway. And if you turn to solar-powered passenger rail service, then you're also, exactly right. That also means that you're going to be creating new jobs for which people have to be trained, so you get at the unemployment problem. So you're able to tackle a number of problems all at once with solutions like that. You have to also shut down permanently facilities like the pulp and paper mill in Pictou. I can't remember the name of it now. They want to reopen again. They want to dump their shit into the Northumberland Strait again, so it's going to kill the fisheries. So you can't allow industries like that to survive if they're going to operate in ways that destroy a sustainable livelihood. Our resources are sustainable. Our forests are sustainable. Our fisheries are sustainable, but there needs to be a plan to make that happen, okay? Pouring effluent from a pulp and paper mill isn't on the agenda for something like that. So we have to make smarter decisions and clearer decisions about what our industry is going to look like and how we're going to manage it. Make a transition to a green economy, and that will open up jobs for people, and then make it possible to come to tech schools or universities affordable so that young people can train for those kinds of jobs, train for that kind of an economy. We have to be thinking forward now, not after some election with a 4-year window.
If I may. So just overall, really sorry, what was that? Okay, fantastic. So we'll just get through the last couple of questions early, but just to sum that up, transition, practical ability to actually have that transition, so providing people with the ability to do so, and then third, on the training side, creating a whole new economy within the renewable sector.
And jobs for people.
Fantastic, yeah. So last couple questions are pretty quick. The first of which is just your message to students going out to the polls this summer.
Well, I'm going to say go out and vote, for sure. I would also say don't let it stop there. Yep. I think that regardless of what party is elected, even if it was my party, which is, long shot, I think it would be great to send me there, and I guarantee you that I would shake up that parliament in short order. You'd be amazed at what one communist could achieve. But the most important thing is that you elect people, vote for whoever you want to vote for, but then make sure that you hold them accountable during the time of their incumbency, okay? Make sure that they don't forget about you. and make sure that they understand that they want that good pension from the House of Commons. They're going to have to complete 2 terms, and if they fail this term, they ain't going back for the next one. That's the kind of pressure that keeps them a little bit more honest in the House of Commons. So that's the other thing I'll say, and that means getting involved in what I would call social organizations. So that means your student union, your societies on campus. I'm not saying you have to become a politician, but keep your eye on the ball and make sure that it's heading in a direction that is good for you and not necessarily just good for the person you just elected. So stay alert, stay active, put pressure on after the election, because it's that stuff in between the elections that really matters, right? So get to the streets and put on the heat.
Fantastic. I love that message. Thanks again, Dr. Frazer. Last little question for you. What is your go-to karaoke song?
It would be The Clash. I'm so bored with the USA.
No way. Love it. Okay, that's awesome, Dr. Frazer. Thanks again for coming in today. So that concludes our interview for today. But once again, this is Dr. Chris Frazer running for the Communist Party of Canada, and he will be on your ballot in Central Nova this time around. So I hope everybody gained a lot from this video, and can't wait to see you at the polls.
Vote early, vote often.
There we go. You said it.
Not in the same election.